Good morning, everybody. My name is Joe Fish-Kay. I'm Principal Research Scientist here in the Emerging Technologies team, and it is my pleasure to present Libby Hemphill. Libby is a professor at the University of Michigan, part of the information school there, School of Information. And I've known Libby's work for a while, and we gave her a Mozilla research grant last year. And I thought that when she mentioned she was going to be in the Bay Area, I thought this was an excellent chance to have her come over and talk about some of the work that she's been doing. Yeah, so I'm really looking forward to it. Libby, over to you.
Thanks. Thank you. Hi, everybody, local and far away.
I should say, I'm sorry. We are taking questions on #ET. Libby's mentioned that she's totally happy to have people interrupt, and so tag me, and then I'll tap her on the shoulder or something. If people are watching on YouTube, you can also send me tweets to @JoeFish, and I'll pass the messages on. And let me know if you particularly want to either sort of ask a question right now or whether you're happy for it to wait to the end. So again, that's on #ET on Slack and @JoeFish on Twitter. Thank you.
Thanks. Hi, good morning. Make sure that I'm on the right fire. I'm so glad that I was able to come and that you all had time for me today. I'm hoping that we'll have a conversation about what it is that my team and I are working on. Thank you so much for making our work possible through funding, which is always a blessing. And I'm hoping that we can have kind of a conversation. I'll tell you what we're working on. If you have ideas or clarifications, I would love your feedback. So please do interrupt if you have questions. Okay, so which window am I in? This one, there we go. Okay, I thought I'd start talking about why do this work. So the title of my talk was Deep Breath, Folks, Using Bots to De-Escalate Conflict in Social Media. And often the next slide from a talk that starts that way is going to go directly into what does de-escalation mean and what are bots and what are we trying to do on social media. And I thought it would be better to start with why do this work in the first place? Because I think that often when we have these conversations about how to make social media less awful, that's where we start, is what if we make it less awful? And I would rather think about how do we make social media better? So instead of thinking about what do we want an absence of, let's think about what do we want the presence of. And what I would like to see in social media is effective use of that kind of tool for justice as a value. That what do I want us to do? I want us to use social media as an effective way for people to have conversations that lead to justice. And so my work is not about removing stuff from online, it's about making space for things that are possible. So even though I will talk about de-escalation, which is sort of a removal of escalation, my goal is to make it possible for conversations to happen, not simply to remove nasty stuff. Okay, so what does that mean for my approach? It means that I find that it's really important for us to be specific about what it is that we're trying to do. So instead of saying something like problematic behaviors, which I put there at the top of my slide, you're like, well, what is a problematic behavior? I can think of lots of different things that are problematic. Harassment, trolling, doxing, insulting, aggression, profanity, some other kind of rule violation if you have one, even an off-topic or a divergent direction could be problematic. So I think it's important that we first be very specific and explicit about what is the thing that we are attending to in this process, whether it's a moderation process or a policy implementation, or in my case, a machine learning approach to understanding something. And then the second is that we need to address the social context in which these behaviors occur. So none of them are occurring in a vacuum, and people have been terrible to each other long before we could do so online. And we can learn from the context of history and interaction and existing struggles for justice elsewhere in informing what we're doing. And what does it mean to learn from a struggle for justice? So as I mentioned up front, I want to think about what is present. And this is in part because I'm informed by work on feminism and anti-racism, where we're looking for equality as a positive thing, not the absence of people from a space. So there's a really powerful passage in one of Martin Luther King Jr.'s letters from the Birmingham jail where the end of the quote is essentially the biggest obstacle towards freedom is the white moderate who is more devoted to order than to justice, who prefers a negative peace which is the absence of tension, to a positive peace, which is the presence of justice. I think that's a helpful quote for us to thinking about what can we learn. We want to learn from existing struggles that happened elsewhere and are ongoing, and how can we use that push online as well. Oh, there. So we're seeking justice over order. This means that I want to avoid tone policing, and I'll come back to what that is. That reason is not greater than emotionality. And so this is when we're having discussions online, sometimes those discussions should get heated. And you'll notice there that I said that they should get heated. Not all discussions should, but some should. Those in which the sides are not equal are the ones that are likely to do so. And our tendency, especially under a free speech paradigm, is to think that all speech is as deserving of a platform as all other speech. And I just don't think that that's true. So that will figure in here as well. So what are ways that we try to do this already? When we're trying to figure out how to stamp out problematic behaviors or even create more open spaces, the most common way that we do it is through flagging and some combination of flagging and human moderation. So this is where you see something nasty and you say through whatever button that platform has provided for you, this is nasty, and then they send it off to an underpaid, overworked, traumatized team of people to examine it, and then usually nothing happens. Sometimes the content gets taken down or there's some sort of retributive punishment for the person who did it. That can result in something like a blanket ban. So here it might be a ban of an individual, or it might be a ban of a set of accounts, like the InfoWars set of accounts, or it might be like Instagram has tried to do with the pro-eating disorder community, where they ban particular hashtags from appearing in search. And then I'm in the artificial intelligence and machine learning space, so this is where we try to be a little smarter about the content. And these things can all happen in combination, and they usually do. That platforms are usually trying one or more of these things together to see if they can reduce the presence of problematic behaviors on their platform. Yeah,
question there. I mean, like you say, that when I get spam on my phone, I get annoyed, I press 2 to be taken off the call list, and they keep calling, and it just like Hilton rewards and blah, blah, blah. And I just feel like even though, and then I went for a while, I went to donotcall.com and entered every phone number and the date and the time and all that information. And I thought they were still kept coming. It's like there's a disconnect between flagging and getting them stopped.
Right.
And I'm wondering if you've figured out technology where flagging plus the actual ability to like share that phone call while it's happening, like how do I like say detour copy over here into this AI machine learning thing that detects what's going on, and then as others report, it's like a much more immediate, no human processing, like machine learning can actually identify those as spam, and then that phone number gets like blocked or whatever it takes.
Sure.
Is there stuff that can
So
be done?
2 things for that. So one is that I think much like the do not call lists, right now there is basically no cost for platforms for getting this wrong. That we don't leave and advertisers don't leave and the money keeps flowing and the users keep coming. So the platforms haven't experienced any costs to that, which is similar to the do not call list, that it's very cheap to just get a different number and start calling you again. There isn't really any cost to them to violating that rule. So that's the first thing, is that without the incentives for platforms to change, we have to work outside the system. So one way that we could work outside the system is, as you mentioned, some sort of crowdsourced, if we document this object and we put it in a space, how can we do that? Are you familiar with HeartMob? This is one that I would recommend. So if you Google HeartMob, I feel like I shouldn't have the URL for that.
That's fine.
So HeartMob is
the .org.
Okay, heartmob.org. That's a positive case. The challenge is that when you crowdsource something like the reporting, you can end up making it possible for the people who you were originally trying to block to rally to overwhelm the system. So crowdsourcing is susceptible to crowds, and if, especially Distributed doxing attempts they just overwhelm the system so that there just aren't enough of the marginalized voices doing the reporting. Instead, there are the aggressors who make it look like, they are the victim.
Yeah, in some cases that might be the case, but in other cases, like you say, the just end runs, if they're just trying to keep skirting around the boundaries, you just build boundaries faster against them.
Yeah. Well, build boundaries faster is a nicer way, I think. I think of it as whack-a-mole. That it's just not, it doesn't scale. Like, it really doesn't scale. So how do we deal with it? So some of these are one of the great things about HeartMob is that it connects victims to social resources. So not just that, it doesn't just do reporting, but reporting is one piece of it, but then the provision of social support is coupled in there. So it's very easy to say, if you're a heart mobber, you send another tweet or a message that says, you're not alone, I have your back, these sorts of support, so that while the minimally effective reporting happens, at least you're getting some positive social support in the meantime. And that I encourage you to use and support that group as one of the positive examples of how crowdsourcing can help.
Yeah.
Okay. In the next few slides, there is profanity. Everybody is prepared. I've tried to keep these are medium level comments for the most part. So why is this so hard? So we all have a sense that there's this nasty stuff out there. Why can't we just take care of it? Like, what makes this problem difficult? So for the next few slides, the dark gray text there is a comment from a platform that we have studied. So in this one it says, and at what point you agreed that you was an ass at that moment? So if we're using a language filter, we would tag this post and take it down because it has profanity in it. But I think for the most part, we can look at this comment and see that it wasn't meant to be destructive. It was meant to get someone else to take accountability for a prior action. And maybe we can imagine a different way that we would like someone to ask someone to take accountability for a prior action, but in many communities, saying, just recognize that you were a jerk is actually what we should do. And in this community, letting them say, you was an ass, man, you gotta own that, is more effective. So instead of saying, let's do it in this nice, polite way, like, how about we let them do it in an effective way? And for some communities, this would be effective. So then in orange there, it's like, what makes this hard? That detection using language alone isn't enough, and that the norms of the community, this may be an acceptable way for people to respond. The next one, you don't read well, do you? He's not defending cops. He's saying they're learning that they can get away with doing illegal things. So why would they stop? They're not stupid. They just know they can get away with it. So again, here, the language is not enough. So often we say things like stupid and illegal will show up if we're using existing dictionaries that try to detect problematic behavior. But here we can tell that the conversation isn't actually about illegal things. It's about policing. And the stupid doesn't refer to another individual. It refers to a class of people who aren't part of the conversation. But that first one that says, you don't read well, do you? It's a little bit of a push, right? It's and we can imagine more polite ways that we would say that.
Just skip that first question and then it's fine,
Right? But maybe, so we could sort of train users to not escalate in the first place. That's one way that we could try to deal with this. So those are the two that I think they're kind of medium level, right? We'd say there are nicer ways to say that, but they're not so bad, but they would be flagged.
And just have your AI filter take out that first question.
But then we wouldn't get it would still flag with stupid and illegal, which is complicated. But so here's another one about profanity. So it says, fuck this guy, should stick your foot in his face for those slides into second. Anybody know what they're actually talking about here? They're talking about baseball. Yeah, so it's not
PowerPoint.
Could also be PowerPoint with those. I'm not sure where second would be, but
I'm not
any
sure
kind of
either.
slides. Yeah, so this is actually, the conversation was about baseball, and the person who's saying, fuck this guy, he's talking about the base runner. So he's not actually talking about somebody who's in the conversation, but talking about someone who, they're having a conversation about a play at second.
Telling the second base person stick his foot out so the slide would be in his
Yep.
face. Yeah.
But this one gets flagged because it has "fuck this guy" and "your foot in his face." These are they sound like physical threats. So for sort of our baselines, they get caught. And so again, if we knew something about the context, even if we knew the name of the, this example is from Reddit and it occurred in our baseball. So if we knew that it was from our baseball, maybe we say, don't worry about profanity or slides, something. But then again, we're just building these dictionaries that, again, like more and more dictionaries are whack-a-mole. I'm not going to read these next two, but I will talk over and you can read them there. As I start to introduce the idea of in-group and out-group slurs, and when is it okay to be angry or profane. So these two come from a discussion in our news about marriage equality in Australia, and whether or not the equal marriage rights afford extra rights to gay people. And these two comments come from the same person. So the one here, your little inbred brain can't comprehend this, is getting a little, like, it starts out, are you really that stupid? And then, I'm not surprised your little inbred brain can't comprehend. And then there's a reaction, and then we get longer. And I'll pause for you to read. So what should we do here? If we are, say that we don't operate at the scale of Reddit, and instead we have just a few comments, what should we do with this one? Should we leave it up on the site? Should we have a heart-to-heart with the person who posted it? Should we take it down? Edit it?
I feel like we should intervene. Maybe not have a heart-to-heart, but just be like, all right, y'all, this is a violation of our code of conduct.
Yeah,
Was this one?
Yeah, I think that one was.
Okay.
I think all of this sort of just, like you say, this putting up a wall with criticism is not going to have the other person care at all about about the point you're trying to get across. It like totally defeats the purpose of trying to raise awareness if you criticize someone first. They're not gonna.
What if the goal here is not to change the mind of the little inbred brain, but to signal to other people who read this thread, who also want to enjoy equal rights, that someone is on their side? So what if we want readers to know that conversations have unequal emotion, and that unequal emotion has some root somewhere, which makes it different from this one, where there's a threat of violence and profanity, which I read as different from this one and from this one. Where I would agree that these are not the most productive ways that this person could have responded. But they do have value in that they signal to us where is a moment of conflict that is so great that it leads to emotionality, and to readers to hear somebody is so supportive of your position that they go apeshit about it. Doesn't mean that going that way is appropriate, but does it mean that we want to take it down, or do we want to sanction in a different way that is supportive of the position but not the expression, I guess.
I like the part where it says, I may call you an inbred piece of shit, but that doesn't take away your rights, dumbass. Like that's like something that like I would want to keep. But then, like, for me, it's the personal attack, which is you are a disgusting excuse for a human being, which is kind of like, now, like, your previous statement, I don't love it, but I feel like you're not trying to personally attack the other person, whereas you're a disgusting excuse for a human being, I feel, is more of a personal attack.
So that's too far. When we go personal, we've gone too far.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I just feel like people who write like that ought to have a filtering system on their own editors clean it up before it gets sent.
Well, but I think I go back to your thing about context, right? Like, what's the social context of this? Are either of these people going to walk away feeling like emotionally damaged and be like, I can't believe they called me an inbred piece of shit or whatever it is, right? I'm not necessarily convinced that they are. I mean,
If this is just to show that we have polarized attitudes, we already know that, and so I guess showing these what's the point in allowing sort of crass ways of communicating to exist? In some channels it's allowed because the readers expect that, but like.
And I think for me, in some channels it's allowed because the emotion is helpful for understanding the issue. That you say crass, I say emotive.
Sure.
And while I still agree there are less hurtful ways and probably more productive ways to have this conversation for this individual, but when someone is talking about whether or not you should enjoy the same rights as other humans, you get heated, and that you get heated is a useful thing for us to know, because it signals that something matters here. And that often our argument is that, well, if you would just be more reasonable, then I could talk to you, or if you would just take a different tone, then I could talk to you. And when we do that, we set the rules for engagement in a way that silences the voices that had already been silenced. So instead of saying, I'll listen to you if you use nice words, like that's what I say to my 5-year-old. But to a grown-up, I say, wow, I see that you're really angry. Can you help me understand? And that those reactions should be different. Instead of silencing, we should have how can we turn this productive? Instead of, when you can calm down, then I can talk to you. It's a very paternalistic, very white way for us to respond. So if we instead say, I hear that you are angry, let's find a way for that anger to be productive. Instead of saying, I'll talk to you when you're done being angry.
Or maybe you flag this with this icon of this person whose head's on fire, like angry, like an angry emoji of sorts, and you sort of dim the content, and someone has to actually click on it if they want to read this heated, like basically
Maybe,
flagging to users to like,
It's kind of an anger trigger warning.
Yeah, it's like when NPR says, explicit content or something follows, whatever. It's like, beware reader.
But then we have to be careful about and we'll come back to this, but what do we mark as explicit content? And NPR is a good example because a lot of times NPR will flag something like profanity, but they won't flag discussions of violence. So if you're commuting in the car and they're about to talk to you about really horrible deaths, they don't warn you about that.
That goes back to why is this so hard?
Yeah.
But let's see what my next one is. Yeah, okay, so I want you to remember the 2 ways that you talked about how we might want to deal with this, because that's going to come up in my next slide. So here then, I'm saying, okay, what if we could try to do some de-escalation? So instead of just silencing the escalation, we try to bring the conversation back down. So the first task here is, can we learn de-escalating behaviors? So can we figure out what already works? Because some of these conversations recover. And then the second thing is, can we teach them to a bot so that it can act as an effective third-party bystander to intervene? So some conversations do go back to productive. And what is already out there? So some ways that I have been inspired to work on this. The one on the left is a reference to something called Rethink. It was developed by a Naperville teenager, and she went on Shark Tank. She's got an app that you can install so that before you post something, if it's nasty, it says, are you sure you want to post that? And often people then don't post the terrible thing that they were going to post. So this is where the deep breath folks comes from, that if there were a way for us to just interrupt the heatedness, that a lot of people, she found 93% of teenagers, or teenagers 93% of the time, were willing to not post that. In her instance, she's looking at cyberbullying, not post that bullying comment, to post something else instead. So if we can just interrupt that feedback to our lizard brains, that can be effective. And then on the right, this Munger paper, I think, is in political behavior. He's a PhD student, I think at NYU, and he used bots to respond to people who had posted, to white men who had posted the N-word on Twitter. And he had bots of different types. So he had bots that were pretending, and they're not really bots because he did it by hand. They're more friendly sock puppets, where they were impersonating white or black men with varying levels of social power, as indicated by their follower numbers. And so here, when it says in-group high, that's the one that had the most effect. So this is when a Twitter account that looks like a white man with high social power says to another white man, hey, there's a real human being at the end of that, quit harassing them. That the instance of their N-word use over time went down for the first week.
Cool.
Panels B and C in this same image in his paper show that there's a decay function though. So he has a 1 week panel, 2 week, and at a month. And so it's not a super fast decay function. I think a month on social media is actually a pretty long time, but the rate of N-word use goes back up. But over a month, it's still lower than it was before. But all of those error bars are pretty wide too. So this was a relatively small study, but it's promising. Like if you focus on just one thing and you can automate a response, you might be able to make a difference. So your instincts are good, that there are ways that we might be able to do this. So my approach is to focus, as you said, Caitlin, on personal insults. So instead of focusing on profanity or on emotional language, we focus on when you say something really mean about the person you're talking to. That's where we want to interrupt. So instead of trying to solve all bad things, we say just when you are attacking someone else in this conversation. And then second, pick a reply that's designed to de-escalate, and then we'll measure the rate of insults, much like Munger measured the rate of N-word use. So on this detection thing, it turns out that is also really hard. So we had a few models. The first one, I built a model with colleagues at Illinois Tech on Instagram that is designed the goal there was to help parents know whether or not there was something brewing on their child's Instagram feed. And it's a pretty good model. It can predict, it's in the 0.7s, 0.8s for accuracy, and that was good enough for parents. And we thought, okay, let's first try to see whether the Instagram model ports to Reddit. And no, it does not. There are two main reasons that it doesn't. The profanity threshold on Reddit is very high. You're expected to swear a lot on Reddit. So if it's overtuned for profanity, it doesn't work there. And the second is that the precision recall trade-off of the model is very different for a bot than it is for a human intervention. So thank you.
Could you explain what that means?
Yeah, I will. Okay. So here this is what we show parents. So precision is how many of when we say that something is bad, how often are we right? So a false positive is if we say that it's bad and it's not really. And that impacts precision. And then recall is how many of the things do we catch? So precision, are we right when we flag it? Recall, did we catch all the stuff?
Oh, okay.
And in most cases for modeling, you're making trade-offs there. That as you get better at being right, you will miss some things. So your precision goes up, but your recall goes down. And as you get better at catching a lot of stuff, you're going to catch more stuff that isn't really bad. And so that way your precision goes down, but your recall goes up. So they're normally in trade-off. Because the Instagram model was designed for parents and they didn't want us to do any intervention, parents wanted us to warn them. So you see here there's hostilities predicted and hostilities present. So this is saying in the Instagram posts for it's always me, we think that something is going to happen here soon. That's what the yellow means. And in Red's baby, we say there's actually something that's already happened. And then what parents wanted to do was to look at those posts themselves and then talk to their kids about them. They didn't want the system to do any of that. And so it was okay that we had moderate precision and good recall because parents wanted to be warned if it might be there. But they could tolerate low precision because they didn't really mind reading innocuous threads. But if you're going to have a bot do something, you want really high precision because people get really angry if the bot interrupts when it shouldn't. And so then we tried a rule-based model. So this is where we tried, like we did earlier, to come up with all the different ways that we would make rules about what you should be able to do. So we tried to use policy documents and to implement them programmatically. And that model completely failed. It was even worse than the Instagram model ported to Reddit, that we, just because of the language and our access to prior histories for users and their previous comments, there just wasn't a way for us to get the rule-based model to work, because the list of rules and then the adaptations for breaking the rules just kept getting longer and longer and longer. And so this model needed constant tuning. So the labor overall didn't actually go down. And if we're trying to help people not have to moderate as much, that model didn't work. So then we tried a two-stage model with a dictionary. And Spacey is a Python module that does the linguistic structure of sentences. So Spacey is a really great tool for helping us figure out when is an insult directed at a human being. And not just at a human, but somebody who's in this conversation. So these are essentially you are constructions, or instead of they are, like the fuck this guy would not be caught by Spacey, but if it were an FU, then it would be. So we're able to exploit the syntax and the structure of the sentence, plus a dictionary component. So we have, the model happens in two stages. It says, does this look like an insult based on this list of ways that you can insult people, which is really long? And is it directed at somebody? And I say not quite fail there because we actually ran a pilot that I'll report on to see how well it did. And we decided that we needed even higher precision because people do get really mad if you interrupt when you shouldn't. So we tried another model where we replaced the dictionary part with a deep learning model trained on hand-labeled insults. It's from Deep Pavlov. So we basically just use, I can link to it in GitHub. So this one, we take basically an out-of-the-box deep learning model that has been trained on somebody else's insult list. And then we add the, is it directed at a human being component? And the precision here gets much better. So here are my precision recall. And we're using F1 scores here because the samples are really unbalanced. So we think that there's a lot of really terrible stuff online, but compared to all the stuff online, terrible stuff is really very small. So Caitlin, the precision again is like the, how often am I right, recall how much of the stuff do I catch, and then F1 is a balance between those two. Okay. And so here, even though the Instagram model has a higher F1 score, we prefer the deep learning model because it has a higher precision. But if we were just writing a paper for AAAI or something, we would use Instagram because it has better overall performance. So it's important that we think about what are we going to do with the results of the model when choosing a model. And then the baseline SVM, so that was the rule-based model. It just, precision at 0.07, we'd be better off randomly selecting things. So that one was really bad. And adding more data did not make it better. So often are things like, oh, we'll just add more data, as though reading insulting comments all day for 8 cents a tag is not a terrible way to spend one's time. Okay, so now we're using this deep learning two-stage model. We have pretty high precision. We're still working on ways that we can increase the precision even higher. And then we start to wonder, well, is there actually going to be enough stuff? If we make our precision 95%, is there going to be enough stuff for us to respond to? Did we get a high enough incident rate that we can have control groups and run our experiment? Well, we're thinking about experimenting on Reddit, where there are 33 insults per minute. So yeah, there's plenty of data for us to respond to. And this is excluding the places, so when we look at Reddit, we are excluding places where you have to be 18, and anything that's been quarantined, and places where you have to have a certain level of karma to post.
Okay. But otherwise you're treating all Reddit subs as the same?
All Reddit subs as possible points of intervention.
Okay.
But not the same. So we're actually, I think...
Like, do you have local models of what an insult is for any given one sub?
No, but when you take out, well, let's see, what is my next slide? We don't. You mentioned Eric Gilbert earlier. We're hoping to use Eric and Ishwar's model of local Reddit rules to improve the precision per Reddit thread or Reddit subreddit.
Sure.
And I think that the places where we really struggle are in gaming.
Yes.
And in places that are sort of aggro anyway. So some of them that get flagged or that get quarantined then pop up as another one. So the red pill or incels
Sure.
and that whole group of basically angry man subreddits.
Yep.
Those have really high incident rates. And then in the general discussion, places like our politics and our news, that the thresholds are not zero, but they're also not very high, that the moderators in those places remove those comments pretty frequently, but
Yeah.
not as frequently as like Ask Science or Ask Historians that are
Which is really locked down.
yeah.
Because that's the thing, if you're treating Ask Science, it's the same as, do you know Straya?
Mm-mm.
It's sort of for people who find r/Australia to be too like constrained and,
Okay.
and polite. So it's entirely Australians being rude to each other all the time. And
Okay.
just any model that blithely took r/Straya and took, say, I don't know, Ask a Historian and treated those as the same data source
Yeah.
would be shooting itself in the foot.
So in one way that we try to deal with that is that we look at what is the overall insult incident rate in this place, and above some certain threshold, we don't interrupt.
Okay.
So another place where this happens, and I forget what the subreddit is called, but it's where you post your own picture so that people will mock you.
Yeah.
Right. The point is to be mean.
Sure.
So it doesn't help us to interrupt in that place.
Okay.
So yeah, we look at sort of what are the overall incidents. We started with what if we tried to do this on all of Reddit, and then we took out quarantine, and then we took out over 18, because it turns out people swear a lot while talking about porn. And then we're working on where is that right threshold that, if the regular incident rate for comments that survive on the site is, 10% or something, then that's a good place for us to intervene, where if most of the comments in that place have insults anyway, that's probably a community norm that we shouldn't violate. So figuring out where should we respond is still happening. Okay. So now we have a reasonable model of our personal insults, and then we select a reply. I guess the sub here is select a place where we should reply. So there are 3 different ways that we look for replies. So the first one is that we learn from the platform. And then here's an example. So one way to de-escalate, or that was effective at de-escalating, was to say, your openness to views that may not agree with your own is very refreshing, and I want to let you know I appreciate your willingness to hear others out. This really did occur on Reddit. I know that it was surprising to me to read this, and I actually asked the student, I was like, that's your reply, right? She's like, no, that actually happened. So that was an effective way to get people to stop being mean. So we're looking for other ways that we can learn from the platform. So we look for when did an insult occur, and then in the next few comments, what happened, and were there more insults after? To look for the candidates for de-escalation are those that appear after insults happen. And they usually start with something like, I appreciate, or I apologize, I understand you, I misunderstood. One of the sad things for us here is that most of those are I statements, which means that bots can't do them, because a bot can't apologize on behalf of someone else. So it limits the space that we can learn. But then we see some things like tone it down and stop posting, stop trolling, you're not wrong, you sound reasonable. Those are things that third parties can do. And I appreciate, our bots can appreciate things. It's just maybe not going to be as effective as an individual who's part of the conflict to say I appreciate or I apologize. And then the second is that we look at the literature about conflict in organizations. So what can we learn from what we know about how we diffuse conflict at work? Most of this is from organizational psychology. Let's see, my next. Yeah, okay. So examples here are, I can't believe how you guys are arguing back and forth, I'm out. Or I understand your overall point, but this is the not right way to discuss in here. Please stop insulting others. What's with the insults? There's no need for that in here. They map to these 4 main ways from organizational psychology, and then the 5th from interpersonal conflict de-escalation. So are there ways that we can indicate compromise or avoidance, smoothing, or confronting? And we're experimenting with what are the relative returns for each of these potential types of de-escalation. And so that's why we need a lot of escalations to respond to, because we have, like a 8 by 35 experiment zone, so it's going to take a while for us to get enough data. By humor strategies using memes or jokes. So if you've ever been involved in a Reddit thread that went haywire, sometimes it's because somebody inserts a non sequitur. And then we're wondering, well, what if we could be positively disruptive? So if something is really nasty, if we can't control the platform like Rethink does, so we can't get people to pause by limiting how frequently they can post or asking them to take a deep breath or something, can we trick them into taking a deep breath by being funny? So what if we put up a cat meme, right? Like, what if you just laugh for a second and we trick your psychology and we turn off your lizard brain for a minute, maybe you don't respond. Or we give you a Michael Jordan gif. Like, who doesn't love one? But one of my favorites is Taylor Swift saying, "Why do we gotta be so mean?" So those are some of the replies that we use. And then the last is from conflict in intimate partner relationships. So here an example is, I understand that you're upset, but could you please remember to respect other people's experiences? I'd appreciate it. And these come from the 4 Horsemen. So the Gottman Institute is about how to keep people married. And so on the left are the 4 Horsemen. These are the big threats to your communication style. So criticism, contempt, defensiveness, and stonewalling. And then on the right are antidotes to those types of conversations. And we're in that contempt layer, where it says attacking a sense of self with an intent to insult or abuse. So they found that marriages where people have a communication style of contempt don't last very long. And that one way that you can try to inoculate the relationship is to build a culture of appreciation. And you can reduce the incident of insult and sort of attacking your humanity, which is what makes a racial slur or an ethnic slur or a sexual orientation slur so powerful, is that they go directly to the humanness of the person at whom a slur is directed. So they are indicators of contempt. So we're looking for ways that our bot could remind each other about positive qualities, or get us to find gratitude or appreciation. And then we have 40 different responses that the bot might post. And then we have the candidate Reddit or subreddit, like, is this a good place for us to try to interrupt? And then we test whether or not the person who made the insult is already in our population, of insulters. We try to interact with each person only one time. And so we sort them into, so we have an insult that we've detected. It's in a subreddit where we feel like we might be able to do something good. And then we assign that person either to treatment or control. And if they get assigned to control, we pick one of the 40 different ways to respond. And then how do we know if we did anything right? So we measure the rate of insults and the life of the conversation. So this is, did we reduce the contempt? And was conversation able to continue? And we did this for a day. And what we found is our best performing reply was, "Why you gotta be so mean? Can't we all just get along?" It got us a lot of positive karma. It got some upvotes, and people made some more funny comments afterwards. And so the thread turned towards humor and away from anger and insult. Our worst performing reply was, "I can't believe how you guys are arguing back and forth. I'm out." Which the threat to leave is very common on Reddit. And we found that it was sometimes useful for that when real users made threats to leave, the conversation often ended, which is one way to get insult rate to go down. But we want productive conversations to continue. So the conversation ending was not great. And then a promising reply, meaning that it got a little bit of positive feedback, not as much as the best performing one, but this conversation is very irritating. You guys really need to tone it down and stick to civil discussion. So here we're explicitly referencing tone and civility, which I try to avoid, but it was effective here, and so I note that I'm not always right. Here's a thing that seems like it might work. And then to your question, Joe Fish, about where does this work and where does it not? Or where should we be and where should we not? So the bot did better in general interest and Q&A sites, Ask Women, news, and then conversations where we screwed up Overwatch for sure, and any of the like aggro. So it might just be that we don't interrupt in gaming. We had mixed results in sports. So there might be some way for the bot to be useful in sports, but out of the box, not as much. And then here's on Reddit, you get karma. We increased our overall karma, so the bot was a net benefit, but people, when they got mad, they got really mad. So we'd like to reduce. And then I have a please stand by, because this experiment may or may not be running now, and in the future. So I'll update you when there are some results. So spring 2019, where are we headed next? So 2019, this anti-insult bot experiment. And then in the summer, we're going to focus on conversational resilience. So this is when conversations recover, how do they recover? So these graphs are from the Instagram study. So on the middle one, this is the position of the first hostile comment. So one of the reasons that we do this work is to figure out, how do we build a priority stack for intervention, even if the intervention is going to be automated? Because we can't actually intervene all the time. So here, this shows us that there are conversations where we have time to intervene before things get really nasty. But there are some conversations that they will flame so fast that our intervention may not be effective if we rely on humans. And so they're good candidates for automated intervention if it's going to happen really fast. And then on the right, here each dot is a comment, each row or each position on the y-axis is a post and comment thread on Instagram. And the color of the comment is gray for innocuous, blue for hostile, and red for a threat of physical violence. And then the space is a measure of time where the x-axis is like seconds, but it's on a log scale, so time-ish. And you can see that there are many conversations that do recover. So they have a lot of blue or red on the left, and then there's gray on the right, and then the conversation continues. And so we're trying to build a big data set of those conversations that have blue or red at the beginning and gray towards the end, so that we can figure out what do they have in common, which will involve reading a lot of them by hand, but we're also probably going to do topic and syntactical models there to see if there are particular ways that they recover. Sadly, for the ones on Instagram that go blue all the way across or red all the way across, they're usually talking about women. So when we look at our feature space, for which features are most related to hostility, she and her and other feminine pronoun or references are the highest performing features, which tells us that it's something about the poster themselves and not the content, which...
It's depressing.
Yeah, I mean, that's a social issue that we're going to have to address, but a bot is not going to fix misogyny.
Yep.
Damn it!
I feel it there before you were coming to...
That was a promise!
And then in the fall, we're going to see, now we'll have these two different models, one on Instagram and one on Reddit, and potentially one on Twitter, that how can we build a cross-domain adaptation? So how can we sort of add training from the new platform to automatically retrain the model for that platform so that we don't have to do this labor for each of them.
Yeah.
So domain adaptation is a fall project. There we go. Thank you so much. So yeah, my approach, let's be really specific to try to solve one thing at a time. We can build combinatorial models, but only when we have the components right. We need to think about the social context in which these things occur. And that we can learn from struggles for justice, especially to stop prioritizing order and instead to prioritize some higher value. And my current project plan is to focus really specifically on these personal insults that are markers of contempt that we recognize as problematic, and then we try to be smart about replying and measure their impact. I work with a lot of great people, some at Michigan and some at Illinois Tech, and you can find their names there, and there's lots of different ways to contact me.
Super.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, and thank you for making this possible. You pay for the students and the data.
We are happy to make this happen and hope this is the first of many collaborations. Are there questions that people want? Are there questions in the room that Caitlin would like to ask?
Yeah.
Are there questions put them on the ET Slack channel, or tell me and then start talking or something like that? Actually, we've even got, because this is all like official and Mozcasty, like there may even be one of those boxes you can talk into. Mr. Hoy, are you enthusiastically about to ask something?
Yeah, why not? What does an ideal API for this look like? Like if we had to start instead with knowing the outcomes we wanted and the tools that we wanted to build them, knowing what was effective. And I apologize that I was only here for part of the meeting, so you may have covered this already, but what does an ideal API for this look like? If we didn't start from, we have a social network, we want to do a thing. If we started instead with, we want to do a thing and we're going to build a social network around it, what does that look like?
Okay, I guess I can try to answer the API question a little bit, but if we're trying to build a social network around it, maybe that's an API question.
Okay.
But so I think that there is the API. In order to be effective, the model requires that we're trying to build it on just the comment itself, in part because that's an easy API to build, so that you can pass a comment instead of having to pass a comment and all the context. But if you were going to build a social network, it would be more effective if you were able to indicate to the model both the context and the content. So like I gave an example earlier of some profanity and physical threat in a baseball discussion where it was reasonable by some measure, but we wouldn't want that in our news, for instance. But we can capture most of the problematic stuff with just the content. And so it could work something like a less racist API than Google's Perspective, where you pass it a comment and it gives you a probability score that's problematic. And then depending on your tool, you can pass it to a second stage. But I think an API is submit a comment, get a probability score back, in part because then you can tune your thresholds for different places that have different thresholds. But being in academia, I'm generally bad about thinking about scale. But
So I have a question here from Tamra, who's up in Seattle, which is whether there's what the correlation is between form factors and effectiveness, right? Like, is the medium the message, right? So you're doing text interactions in a text format. Do you think that voice stuff would be more impactful than text? Do you have anything around that?
I don't have anything around voice. That's a good question. We have talked about ways that we could look at images, especially because we started looking on Instagram. Like, are there particular ways that people are aggressive or inappropriate in their image response? So if you think about on Jezebel, if you're familiar with Jezebel, one way that they quickly derail conversation is they put up really violent porn GIFs as a way to derail conversation. So are there ways that we could detect sort of aggression through imagery? But voice I haven't really thought about. I do think that it would be useful, though, because we can do some things with pitch and speech rate that would be really helpful for the sort of emotionality that's useful and emotionality that's harmful. I saw a really good talk at the Midwest Political Science Association meeting last year about using pitch to study political speech. That I think there's some stuff there to learn about pitch and speech rate in voice, but that's beyond my expertise, but I think is a really good question.
Well, there's some really weird, we've actually been doing Janeth Tsai up in Seattle, and Jess Margolin, who is a student at CMU, was an intern last summer, and they started looking at how you evaluate the quality of voices. And one of the things we found, so we have our own voices that our team in Berlin have made, Deep Speech Nancy, but we were comparing those to the Amazon Polly voices, to the Google WaveNet voices, and the differences between men and women are really significant, right? People really have very different, gender turns out to be a very good predictor of which voices you will like. In particular, women don't like listening to women voices, right? To sort of summarize to summarize, quite a lot of data and quite a lot of research, right? Like,
Yeah.
Which ties in, I mean, we know that there are gender effects, right? I mean, there's sort of anecdotal stuff about Germans, when like the first automated voices happened in cars, German men didn't want women telling them what to do, right? Was sort of the way it was framed. But it strikes me, yeah, there's some interesting stuff there around interventions that could be, that could leverage those assumptions.
Yeah, I think that's a really good idea. I wrote it down.
I like, would Bob Ross's voice calm people down? I like that.
I think that if I worked on a platform side, I think the quickest way that you can address this is some kind of interruption. We just know so much about the psychology of aggression that if you can just slow down, or if you've ever parented a toddler, if you just count to 4, like we put in a little Daniel Tiger and make people do a math problem, or make them click refresh or something, that is a really effective way to deal with this stuff, and it's preventative. But it does mean that people get frustrated with the platform itself for a moment, so I understand the incentive is off a little bit, but it would make a lot of sense to rate limit aggro.
Sure.
In part because we all do it. I think one of the things I didn't mention up front is that often what it means is if we pay attention to social context, is that there's a context in which we will all behave inappropriately. So this is not that there are bad users and good users, but there are moments where people make mistakes, and that we ought to be able to address them justly.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I was trying to figure out how to frame this question, but I was wondering, like, if the norms of the Reddits or the Instagram places that you were testing on, like, if you were able to see, like, okay, well, this particular community has, like, kind of a low tolerance for, like, personal insult behavior, and how that impacted the bot's effectiveness. Like, I'm just curious, because, like, we know that there's, like, the really toxic subreddits where we should just put up a sign that says no one should enter this place.
Dragons.
Yeah, exactly. Like,
Yep.
here be dragons, like, don't even go there. But, like, was that part of the study at all?
Yeah, so the Instagram one is actually a good case for this, because the network that we were studying on Instagram was around a high school on the south side of Chicago. And the demographics of this neighborhood are majority minority and actually majority Black. So there were somewhere between 8 and 12% of the population of that school is white, and then about 60 or 70% is African American, and then there's some multiracial or some other non-white race in the middle. And what that meant for our detection, and why I bring up perspective as a sort of racist API, that a lot of the conversation that those teenagers have with each other would be completely inappropriate for us in this room to have, but is completely reasonable and appropriate for them to have. And so we had to remove roughly a third of the things that constitute racial slur because it's in-group conversation.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And so if we have these really aggressive, like, you may not use slur in any way rules, then we actually silence really regular socially beneficial speech. And that it's not about what is the thing being said, but who is saying the thing and to whom. And that's why we need something about the structure as well in that second moment. But the Instagram model was also different because we weren't using a bot to respond. We were just flagging stuff for parents who said they wanted to have conversations with their kids. In part because that project started with us talking to high schools about what their biggest problems were, because we think, oh, cyberbullying is in the news, let's address cyberbullying. And they said, I don't care about that. What I care about is these 2 girls get into it offline, they escalate at school during the day online, and then they have a physical altercation in the hallway as they're leaving. And that happens every single day. Cyberbullying happens, and we can deal with it when it does, but I want to keep these girls out of juvie. So then, like, oh, okay, we had the problem wrong, so we need to go back and think about what is the problem. And they also have the school day to respond. So we didn't need to be able to respond in a minute. We needed to be able to respond in the 4-hour block between when they enter the building and when their first outdoor break happens. And so we were able to do some tuning in there as well. Yeah, and parents were really emphatic that they didn't want the system to do anything. They thought that was creepy. They just wanted some kind of passive alert that they could check on. And then if something was there, just show them what happened. So that's why we link back to the thread. And then they will talk to their kids about it.
That's fascinating.
Yeah.
That's so cool.
Yeah. And it was really great to send students out on those interviews too, because we assume, like, we know what the problem is and we know what people might want, and we just have to build the model. And at every moment in that project, the population we were working with was like, no, that's not my issue, or no, that's not what I need you to do. So that was a good learning experience for us.
Cool. All right, that's what we've got time for. So I'm
Thanks,
going
everybody.
to say thank you very much to Libby. I'm going to remind everybody that we've got another talk in this speaker series next Thursday at the same time. And that's Jane McGonigal will be talking about the Ethical OS Toolkit. So I'm pretty excited to hear that, and Miriam will be hosting that. So look forward to seeing you there. Thank you all for coming, and have a very good weekend. Bye-bye.